of you know your great 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 grandfather? Some of us don't even know our grandparents. Well, I heard one time someone say the reason why you don't know them is because they didn't leave you anything. See, when people talk about wealth, they usually talk about money, investments, real estate, or business ownership. But one of the most overlooked forms of wealth is legacy. What happens when a family story is erased? What happens when a community forgets its history? And what opportunities are lost when future generations don't know where they came from? See, history is often viewed as something that happened in the past, but history shapes the opportunities available today. The stories we preserve influence our identity, our values, and our vision for the future. But what most people don't often tell you about wealth is that families who successfully build generational wealth don't just pass down money, they pass down stories, lessons, relationships, culture, and a sense of purpose. See, knowing where you come from can provide the resilience needed to overcome obstacles and inspiration needed to create something greater than yourself. Communities that preserve their history often build stronger institutions, stronger networks, stronger economic futures. Heritage can become education, and education can become empowerment, and empowerment can become opportunity. Today's guest is Fred Rouse III, the grandson of Fred Rouse, a black butcher and union worker whose 1921 lynching became one of the most significant yet overlooked racial injustices in Texas history. Rather than allowing his family story to be forgotten, Fred has dedicated himself to preserving his grandfather's legacy through education, historical preservation, and community engagement. He is leading efforts to establish a memorial center honoring Fred Rouse and is helping communities better understand the lessons of history, resilience, and remembrance. Through his work, Fred demonstrates how family can transform tragedy into purpose and how preserving legacy can inspire future generations to build stronger communities. His mission reminds us that legacy is not simply what we inherit, but what we choose to build. Please join me in welcoming Fred Rouse III to the next 250. Okay, so, recently I was in Evanston, Illinois, and I had a pleasure of visiting the the Evanston Historical Center. And it was like a house that's over 100 years old. And one of the things I noticed was like along the walls, like all these portraits of people. So I asked the director, I said, so are all these people family members? She was like, they're all family members, but maybe 3 or 4 that are just close friends of the family. And it started making me think about things, right? Like especially like in my community and me growing up, I only can go back as far as my great-great-grandmother. And I realized that a lot of people can't go, even that far. Do you know why that is? Well, you know what someone told me? They said it's because they didn't leave you anything. And that's why you don't know them.
And thank you for sharing that with me. I think that is because a lot of the history gets lost. And I think a lot of times too, some families, back, in those days, didn't keep those records, or those records were not passed down to the next generation. So I think it's a number of things that keeps that family history sometimes from passing from generation to generation.
Which brings me to you, right? So you didn't grow up knowing the story about your grandfather, right? But you later, come to know the history and, what happened with your family. Why is that important for people to know that today?
Well, I think it's important for people to know because that history is important. Because I think everyone should know where they come from. The story of my grandfather, of course, is Mr. Fred Rouse. Fred Rouse is the only recorded African American to be lynched in all of Tarrant County. He was lynched back in December of 1921, and um, and I just found out about this story myself just 6 years ago because that information and those stories were not passed down because I think one of the reasons why because it was so painful that they didn't want to tell anybody about what happened to my grandfather. So back in 2020, I'm sitting on my couch watching Game One of the NBA Finals, Lakers and the Heat, and I get a phone call from a guy that I went to Texas Tech with, and he was like, "Hey Fred, hey, some friends of mine have done the genealogy of your family, and they want to know if they can give you a phone call." And 30 minutes later, I get a phone call from a TCU professor, a news reporter, an attorney, and another professor. And so I'm like, okay, what do y'all want? It's four of y'all and one of me. What's going on? And so they said, Fred, we found your grandfather. And my initial reaction was no. My grandfather's buried in East Texas, which I was talking about my mom's dad. And they was like, no, we found your dad's dad. And I'm like, again, no, because I don't even know who that is, because I didn't know my dad's side of the family. So they began to tell me the story of my grandfather, how he was the only African American to be, lynched, recorded lynched in Tarrant County.
Sounds like he was a strong person. Some people will have something going on and won't stand up for it. They'll just maybe talk about it, but he was willing to just, stand up for what he believed, he should, the rights that he deserved. Now, what I notice with a lot of families, we typically have like a trend of certain types of careers that we have within our family. Is there anybody else in your family that's like an activist, or can you tell us, like, by trade, what's your occupation?
By trade, I'm a network engineer. I got my bachelor's degree from Texas Tech in management information systems.
So is anybody else in your family that does the same? Anybody's an activist or anything like that?
Well, nobody that I can think of that's an activist as far as my family goes. One and did you talk about the history not being passed down, or that legacy not being passed down to the current generations? Another thing that came out of my grandfather's story is when I got the first initial phone call, they said, "Oh, Fred, and by the way, two things: you share his name." I didn't even know I shared my grandfather's name. And the second thing was, "Oh, and by the way, you have relatives here in Fort Worth that want to meet you." So I went for 46 years of my life, and I'm living 15 miles away from Fort Worth because I live in Mansfield. So I was able to, they set up a meeting between myself and the other Rouses, same last name, everything. And I finally got a chance to meet them. So I think that, that's what happens a lot of times, with these racial terror instances, other situations in families, that total families just get separated.
So that wasn't your field to be an activist, and if other people in your family knew about it, even if you didn't know them, what was it that was within you to make you act on it?
I think that it was a sense of, duty. I think because I grew up where, back in the 80s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and that was a time where, civil rights, the Martin Luther King, speech, and Martin Luther King Day. So I've always had an interest in civil rights. But when I got the phone call, and found the story about my grandfather, the Tarrant County Coalition for Peace and Justice, which is the organization that I'm the president of now, they called me. Matter of fact, they were on the phone, the initial phone call, and they said, "Hey, do you want to be a part of our organization?" And I was like, "Yeah, I do." And so that's how I got started as far as being an activist goes. And knowing what happened to my grandfather and so many other, African Americans in America, it was like it was my duty to act. I had to do something to preserve their names, their voices, and so that's what got me into activism.
And you know my background when it comes to like Juneteenth, right? So I always hear, people, well, why are y'all still walking? And even if I apply that to business, right? Like I have team members, I don't like to, like if something bad were to happen, like I have a bad day, I don't want to revisit that bad day and keep harping on it. When it comes to Juneteenth, I tell people we're not sitting there trying to, relive slavery. That's not what we're trying to do. When you have to sit there and tell your story over and over again, do you feel like you're having to like relive some type of sense of trauma, or is that something that your family may feel that's happening? Like they have to go through it again?
Um, I don't think it's reliving, the trauma. I think it's bringing awareness to the community about what happened. Because, even getting out telling the story, there are some people who live in the same neighborhood that my grandfather was murdered at, and they never knew the story. I think that for me, as far as it being re-traumatizing, I don't think that's it. And it never gets easy to tell the story because when describing the graphicness of what happened to my grandfather it's very horrific. But I tell it because I don't want people to forget. Because especially now, I think a lot of times we get so comfortable in life, we're driving our fancy cars and our fancy homes, and but they're trying to take away your voting rights, and all these different things are going on that a lot of people may not be aware of. Um, but I think it's good to let people or give people a sense of awareness of where we were, the reason why we had the civil rights movement, so that we can have a lot of the rights and be able to sit in the front of the bus versus the back of the bus and things of that nature. So my grandfather's story is just a beacon light that shines awareness and education on this is where we were. This is what happened to a lot of our family members and our grandfathers and grandmothers. It was women too that were being hung from trees too. And we want to give voice to the voiceless and all those people who went through those racial terror tragedies.
Okay. And so from this, you're mentioning you're going to have a memorial center. Talk to me about that, and more so, like again, a person who does not do this to be able to want to stand up, align themselves with people. You can't just walk up out your house and say, "Oh, I want to have a building. I want to have a memorial center." Talk to me about that whole journey. You said you aligned yourself with people, and I know it wasn't free. So how? Talk to me. How?
Well, I think that once it finally sunk in, that we went through all the verification processes to make sure, it's just your mom name, your dad name, your sister, so we went through all of that stuff, and it really started to set in. And also, my mom had died of the COVID in August of 2020. So, and I found this information out in September of 2020. So I think that once everything started to sink in, it was like, because I went through all the emotions, the anger, the frustration, just the disbelief that this happened to one of my family members and so close. It was a sense of I got to do something, because nobody was ever convicted of my grandfather's murder. So that gave me the motivation. It was the catalyst that made me want to do more, almost like to avenge his name, avenge his honor. And all the other people that have went through that, avenge their honors and their names. So when they approached me, the Tarrant County Coalition for Peace and Justice, that I want to join the organization, of course I said yes. It was not easy, and we all sat around and tried to figure out, okay, we have this name of this man that was lynched here in Tarrant County. How do we honor him? Because we have to do something. And so it came up in a meeting, why don't we build a memorial site to honor him? And so we stuck with that. We got a $250,000 grant, from an organization to purchase the land, which is the actual land where my grandfather was hung from the tree. So we did that. We got with an organization called Design Jones out of Arlington, Texas, which is a minority-owned design architectural firm. And so we got with them, and also got some ideas from the community as what would the community want, as for, in that space. And so, with all that information, we gathered together, and Design Jones designed the memorial site. Okay, and so after we got the memorial site designed, okay, then there was, okay, where do we get the funds to build it? So and so at first it was just a corner lot. It was just land, just grass and just land. And so one of the things that I would do at first, we didn't even have anybody to cut the grass. So I would come out there with my little push mower, and I would just cut the grass, and it was, for me, it was a closeness for me because I felt like I was able to be closer to my grandfather because that's where his spirit last was at that site. So so it was really emotional and touching for me to do that, and it was an honor for me to do that, just to be out there, pushing my lawnmower, cutting the grass, and talking to him. So after I did that for a while, we finally got a lawn guy to come out a couple of times a month and start cutting the grass. But we had to put in a lot of applications. We had to get the word out to the community what we were doing. A lot of advertising, a lot of grant applications went out. And so, so that went on for a couple of years. And so we finally got a really big grant, from $1 million grant from an organization. And that really propelled us to be able to start the construction.
Okay. And so years, right? It took time.
Yes.
You didn't give up.
Didn't give up.
Why you didn't give up?
Because we knew this is something that we wanted. And we had the support of the city. We had the support of the community. Everybody knew this was coming. And we just had to keep pushing until we finally got the funds to get it built. And we've been working on this for 6 years now. 6 years. And it should be complete in about 8 weeks. So it's at the corner of 12th and Samuel. The address is 1000 Northeast 12th Street. Fort Worth, Texas. And it's beautiful. I mean, it's gonna have Core-10 panels where you can they have the cutout of the death tree in it. So when you first walk in, you'll be walking through the actual death tree that my grandfather was hung from. We have over 2,000 pavers on the ground, and we're trying to allow the community to purchase pavers. They start at $250 a piece. You can have your name or a family member's name or a loved one's name that has passed away, their name at the memorial site. So it's definitely a community-based project, and we just never gave up because we knew this is what we had to do.
A nonprofit can build an online team to research grants, write funding proposals, manage donor outreach, and run digital campaigns, bringing in more funding while your leadership stays focused on serving the community. So that's why we partner with Remoting.work, to bring you access to a workforce to help you scale. And if you use the link in the caption, you'll receive $500 off your first hire.
Meet Sarah, a founder, a dreamer, and right now, a one-woman army. Sarah's building her business on grit and late nights, just like 80% of small business owners, doing it all by herself because she doesn't have the budget for the right employee. She's got big dreams, but to grow, she needs skilled help that's reliable, affordable, and built for small businesses. That's where Remoting.work comes in, to help businesses like Sarah's find full-time employees that they can afford from low-cost economies. With pre-vetted talent working from secure, professionally managed environments and aligned to your time zone, Remoting.work makes finding the right help easy and stress-free. Hire anyone, anywhere. Think differently. Think Remoting.work.
So what, through this whole process, right, even if you can just reflect on information you've learned about your grandfather's life, not the incident, but his life, right? Because we want to celebrate life. And
Yes.
there's got to be something, there's apparently a lot of that in you too, but what can you say you've learned through this whole process?
Oh my goodness. Well, other than the tragedy that happened to him, I learned that my grandfather was a hard worker. He was working as a butcher at the stockyard at the Swift Company. He was a father. My dad was 5 months old when my grandfather got murdered. Uh, and so he had a wife, he had a family. And so all my grandfather was doing was going to work to provide for his family. And um, this happened, to him. I believe that when my grandfather was hanging from the tree and he took his last breath, I believe he said that this is only the beginning, because there were so many things that had to happen between 100 years ago and now, to where we're putting a memorial site in the very space where he was murdered at. I believe that somewhere in there was the voice of God saying, not only did I give you his name, but I'm giving you his purpose. Just within 6 years, we are building a $2 million memorial site. I'm also on the Transform 1012 organization's board, where we purchased the old KKK building here in Fort Worth, which is 1012 North Main Street, which is also about a mile from the memorial site. And that is a $70 million project. And we're working on that now as well. All of these things had to transpire over that 100-year period, even to the point of where when we did the groundbreaking ceremony for the memorial site, it was done on the 100th year anniversary of my grandfather's murder. He was murdered on December 11th, 1921. We had the groundbreaking ceremony on December 11th, 2021. And one of the amazing things that I told the crowd was, I was like, well, isn't it amazing how 100 years ago today, they thought they killed the man, Fred Rouse. They thought they erased the name, Fred Rouse. His blood was shed on this land. His flesh was riddled with bullets on this land. And I said, 100 years later to the day, his flesh comes back, his blood comes back, and his name comes back. Because here I stand, I'm Fred Rouse III. And I said, oh, and by the way, an hour from here, there's another man, and his name is Fred Rouse IV. And I was talking about my son.
And so with that, like that's so inspiring. It really is, because you was able to turn tragedy into like a legacy, and it's going to be, it's so strong to the next generation, right? To those who feel like, okay, I've had this traumatic experience, or maybe no one left anything to me. How do I stand up? Like, what would you say to them so they can stand up, so they can create a legacy for themselves?
I would tell them to just look around, feel the energy, from their people, from their if they have any other family members, build within themselves and figure out what part of themselves do they want to leave to the next generation. Whether it's some type of educational thing, some type of cultural thing, some type of values or morals, because I think as individuals we all have something to give to this world. Nobody. I just don't believe that people are born into the world and not have anything. They just pass through life. They're born, they die. So I think that we all have an individual spirit within us that we can bring to the next generation, whatever that may be. It could be, like I say, different values, core values. It could be assets. It could be teachings and educational tools, or thoughts, or words, mentorship that we can give to the next generation, because each generation needs to see what preceded them, and how things were, so that they know what changes to make the world a better place.
Well said. Let everybody know, how can we, visit, how can we follow, how can we support your organizations?
Well, thank you for asking me that. The name of my organization is called the Tarrant County Coalition for Peace and Justice. Our website is tccpj.org. And one way to support us is to go to our website, go to the Donate tab. You can donate any amount of money that you want. All proceeds are going to finish the construction of the memorial site. Like I was saying earlier, we have about 2,000 pavers that we are allowing the community to purchase. We also have a website called fredrouse.com, that birthed out of my grandfather's story. And if you go to fredrouse.com, you'll see we have a brand, we have a pattern for our logo. And in that pattern, you'll see little leaves in that pattern. Well, those little leaves are hackberry leaves, because my grandfather was hung from a hackberry tree. We also have a donor wall at the site where we're going to have plaques that you can purchase.
Thank you. Thank you for joining the next 250.
Nope. Well, thank you for having me. It's been great. And yeah, hope to see you at the grand opening. He was a worker at the Swift Company in the stockyards, and back in 1921. And so one day, getting off work, he was attacked by some of the strikers that were striking against the company because they wanted higher wages. So they were out in the street, picketing and striking. And so the company was like, well, we'll just hire the minorities in the neighborhood, pay them less money to do the same work. And so my grandfather was one of them. And so they beat him to near death right there in the stockyards. And police came to take him to the morgue, and they found out he was still alive. So they then took him to the city and county hospital, which is now the Bass Performance Maddox Hall, right there at the corner of 4th and Jones Street in Fort Worth, down into the Negro ward, and he was there for 5 days. Reports say that about 30 masked men came in and kidnapped him from the hospital. They then proceeded to shoot him. They said they riddled his body with bullets. They stabbed him multiple times, and they hung him from a tree right there at the corner of 12th and Samuels, which is where we are now constructing the Mr. Fred Rouse Memorial Site.